This show is proudly supported by Habitats at Home, Australia's leading PVC reptile enclosure specialist. Check them out on Instagram and Facebook at Habitats at Home, and be sure to visit habitatsathome.com.au if you're in the market for a new PVC reptile enclosure or other reptile accessories. Massive thanks to Tyson over at Habitats at Home. We'd like to thank our podcast sponsor, Bay, reimagining reptile keeping through innovation. They combine quality, design, and function to create high-end 3D printed reptile products. And if you've got a unique setup or problem, they'll craft a custom solution made just for you. Check them out on Instagram at Bay. This show is proudly supported by Dan from Red Earth Reptiles. If you want to drool over some of the best looking green tree pythons in the country, check out Dan on Instagram at red_earth_reptiles. G'day and welcome to Under the Heat Lamp with Joe Mack. Today I'm joined with Alex Mitchell. G'day Alex, how you going?
Hey Joe, how you going?
Yeah, really well, thanks mate. I'm stoked to have you on the show today. We had a slight hiccup yesterday with a bit of a storm, but we're on today.
We got there in the end.
We got there in the end, yeah, definitely. If anyone's not familiar with you, would you mind to give us a bit of a rundown on your history with reptiles?
Yeah, sure. My name's Alex Mitchell. I've been, passionate, interested in reptiles for God, as long as I can remember really now. Always sort of from a young age, really sort of interested in working in zoos, I guess, and that's sort of what I pursued really as a career. And I'm pretty happy to say I've been able to make a career of it. Worked at a number of different zoos, primarily with herp, with reptile and amphibian, in New South Wales, in Queensland, and down in Victoria now. And my current position is at Melbourne Zoo, and I'm General Manager of Life Sciences, so basically overseeing all of the animal keeping teams and the veterinary teams on site as well.
A very significant role. That's absolutely massive. But
It is.
as we just touched on just before we started recording, is you've been in the industry for a very long time. What did the start of your career look like?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, there's a lot of different ways to answer that one. For me, probably sort of back in 2004, 2005 was when I first started working in zoos and aquariums. Probably the main difference back then is, I guess, just the tech, particularly for herp, is the technology that we're working with back then is so different to what we've got available now. And we're learning so much every day still about how we can best keep herp in captivity. Some of the advances with heating and lighting, I think, is just immense. There's been definitely some improvements in OH&S over the time as well, I think. Thinking back to some of the things sort of back in those days compared to now, very different. But I mean, still though, I think that huge evolution of herp husbandry, and like listening to one of my mentors, John Burkett, who was the former herp curator here at Melbourne Zoo, talk about like incubating eggs at times before they even had incubators, and having to do them sort of in a dungeon under the reptile house, and when feeder insects weren't commercially available and things like that. Obviously that was well before my time, but even in those sort of 20-something years, still seeing some really huge advances in husbandry, which is cool.
Yeah, it's super cool. And there's definitely a push, maybe now so more than back then, towards actually trying to advance and to better things. I think
100%.
maybe back then it was just a lot of things were just a means to an end. Like, for example, heating a cage 20 years ago, you just probably did whatever you could to get it hot. But nowadays we're looking more into methods of heat transfer and what's more efficient for the animals and that sort of thing. You'd say that's probably pretty accurate?
Yeah, I would definitely. Like the understanding we've got now of infrared and the wavelengths of infrared and visible light and things like that. But I guess probably the other big difference that I've seen is the trend for zoos to be involved in genuine conservation. I think there's been a tendency for a long time for zoos to have a koala and be saying we've got it for conservation purposes. But there's the real trend in a lot of zoos across Australia and throughout the world, with herp in particular, of contributing to really tangible, genuine conservation outcomes. Number of frog and reptile species here at Melbourne. We've got conservation breeding programs for southern corroboree frog, borbor frogs, 2 species of grassland earless dragon. I think to date we've released in the vicinity of 25 to 30,000 animals from the herp precinct to the wild.
Wow.
Which is huge.
That's amazing. That is interesting, and that opens up a whole topic of conversation about
Conservation
conservation.
conversations.
It does. The earless dragons are an interesting one.
Mm.
So there's the Monaro and the Canberra earless dragons. Is it those two
Yeah,
species?
there's a few different species in the Tympanocriptus sort of complex, the grassland earless dragon complex. Up until 2019, 2020, a lot of them were classified as being Tympanocriptus pingiacola. Jane Melville at Museums Victoria published a paper to reclassify them into distinct species. So the Canberra earless dragon, which was one of the species that we work with here at Melbourne, we first established a population of those here at the zoo in 2019, and have since released a couple of hundred animals back into protected areas of habitat in the ACT. They are now Tympanocriptus lineata. And the Victorian species, Tympanocriptus pingiacola, which was rediscovered at the start of 2023, which was just huge.
Yeah, that's massive. So from rediscovering them in 2023, do you
Yeah,
work with that species as well at
we
the zoo?
do. Yes, we do. So
Yeah.
I mean, that was that's one of those sort of days in a career, I guess, that you remember getting the phone call of the rediscovery of a species that hadn't been seen in 50 plus
Oh
years.
yeah.
Incredible. And yeah, since that discovery or the rediscovery of them and we can talk a little bit about that. That's quite an interesting story if you like, Joe.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'd love to.
Yeah, so there are species that hadn't been seen for over 50 years, that were at one point thought to be potentially extinct. One animal was turned up on the last survey by two consultant ecologists, basically going through a property to survey that property prior to it being potentially developed. Under one of the last tiles that they flipped, they found a little lizard. Not exactly sure what it
Of
was, snapped
course.
a photo of it. And next thing you know, the rediscovery of the Victorian grassland earless dragon. And I
Amazing.
remember at the time sort of saying, hey, that's probably equivalent to like the reptile rediscovery in the thylacine, especially that close to Melbourne. This area, this one property, one paddock, just on the outskirts of Melbourne. So incredible that this little species has been persisting for that long.
Yeah, amazing. And obviously, their biggest threat would be further development. And are they living on degraded farmland? Is that where they're
Oh, yeah,
occupied?
it's really hard to say because we know this animal from literally one paddock.
Yeah,
Like they
crazy.
couldn't be more in peril, really. And it took multiple surveys on that paddock before they were rediscovered. So it really makes me think, geez, how many other areas may they have been that have been bulldozed and destroyed, and we'll never know at all that animal might have been there. Um, I mean, the western suburbs of Melbourne's a really area. It's an area that's really been quite heavily developed.
Yeah.
And this one area they did turn up on had been managed in a similar way in terms of land management, a low sheep density for quite a long period of time. And that's probably contributed to the persistence of this dragon on that property. But
Yeah.
yeah, what a tremendous moment, the rediscovery of the Victorian earless dragon.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. But what happened next? So they found one, or
Yeah.
or numerous surveys happened, and more were found.
Yeah.
Then
Yeah.
what happened in terms of
Well, it was
bringing
really
them
a
into
moment where
captivity?
sort of, in a lot of ways, almost every star and planet and everything in the galaxy lined up. In that we had a couple of key people here at Zoos Victoria that had quite a background in surveying and developing husbandry techniques for earless dragons. We'd actually only a couple of months before been involved in a workshop with the national recovery team around developing the national conservation plan for the Tympanocriptus genus. And in there, we'd actually been involved in drafting a rediscovery protocol for the Victorian earless dragon, which is now being
Huh.
adapted for the Bathurst earless dragon as well. And in there, we literally had, upon rediscovery, Melbourne's been notified to establish a captive population of those animals, and that's exactly what we did. We've since bred, I couldn't tell you how many, quite a few. We haven't had the
Yeah.
best breeding season this year, in all honesty, but it's been very weird weather down here in Melbourne. We've had some really extreme heat days and had sort of the coldest start to summer in 20-something years. But we've been quite successful. We've got several hundred animals on site now between both species.
Wow.
And I think the little Victorian earless dragon is definitely in a much better position now from a recovery perspective than it was a couple of years ago. But I mean, it's still the wild status of this animal that we've really got to be concerned about and be proactive about looking for potentially other areas where it might be persisting. And one of the next challenges is looking at potentially where can we release this animal to.
Yes, obviously a challenge because I assumed that that area where they have been found is no longer set for development. But I'd almost like guarantee that everywhere else around it, if the lizard hasn't been found, it's getting bulldozed.
Yeah,
And
you can read between the lines however you want there, Joe, but I might not comment on that one.
yeah, sure, sure. But
You would assume that, but unfortunately, there's a lot of other layers of policy and things like that in place.
yeah, sure.
Yeah, but there
Makes
is
it tricky.
overarching federal legislation as well and things like that. So there's multiple layers at play here.
Layers. Nothing's ever easy.
Yeah,
Um, Makes it challenging, especially since,
yeah,
you had that one little olive branch of
mhm,
finding one, and then
yeah,
it took numerous surveys to find them
mhm,
again,
yeah,
which just goes to show the effort required to
mhm,
actually find some of
yeah,
these cryptic things
yeah.
might not
And that they are
necessarily align with
incredibly cryptic little dragon. They spend the majority of
it.
the time underground in spider burrows, so they've got a symbiotic relationship with wolf spiders.
Yeah,
Um, and yeah, very, very cryptic little species. I mean, it's in their genus, same Tympano cryptic, yeah, or
cryptic.
cryptus, yeah,
Yeah,
hidden ear,
yeah,
yeah,
yeah, yeah. Hidden ear,
yeah,
hidden lifestyle too.
yeah, exactly.
What's their husbandry like? Is it just like most of the other small dragons?
Yeah, similar, and I guess that was the beauty of being involved. Like I said before, it was really like almost every star and planet in the galaxy lined up with the rediscovery. Um, and we initially acquired Canberra earless dragons here at Melbourne Zoo in 2019 to basically start to develop husbandry protocols in the event of the rediscovery of the Victorian animal. And since we initially acquired those animals back in 2019, the wild status of the Canberra dragon has changed. So that's turned from um, having them here for the purpose of learning their husbandry and working how to keep them, breed them, care for them, to essentially a full recovery program. So their husbandry has evolved over time. I guess being a southeastern species, they do go through quite extreme temperature variations between summer and
Yeah,
winter. Um, During the summer months, they're an incredibly active species, a lot of food going to them. But they're also quite a short-lived species, similar to a lot of the other small dragons like Ctenophorus and species like that. They're only living a couple of years, so everything seems to happen really quick with them.
yeah.
Um, they they definitely can reproduce in their first year. We've had them up to triple clutch before.
Wow.
Um, but they're a challenging little species. Their husbandry is definitely a lot more intricate, I'd say, than something like a bearded dragon, obviously.
Yeah, yeah, gotcha.
Yeah.
And small clutches or relatively large
Yeah, you're
clutches?
looking at sort of between one to, I think their biggest clutch is 7 or 8 eggs, which is a huge clutch, but probably
That's a
on
big
average about
clutch.
2 to 3, 2 to 4.
Yeah, I imagine they'd come out like little Tic Tacs about the size of a Tic
Literally
Tac or
about the
something.
size of a Tic Tac, something like 0.3 of a gram. Yeah,
Yeah, just ridiculous.
yeah,
I've hatched two-line dragons in the past, and they're
yeah,
just sort of little tiny heads on legs running around chewing down pinhead crickets. It's
yeah,
awesome.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And I guess that's also like a interesting story is because they live in spider burrows, we replicate that in captivity by providing artificial spider burrows, a little PVC burrow. And that was something we worked out in the first year of having the Canberra dragons on the site is we've got a spider burrow under a heat lamp. They're going to typically lay in that spider burrow, in that artificial burrow.
Checks out.
And in the early days of that, we'd actually gone to the effort of gluing it all together and everything like that. So having to carefully extract these precious little eggs out of a thin bit of PVC
Oh,
pipe,
oh,
it's
no, it's like
terrifying.
it's like playing Operation.
It is, yeah, yeah, literally, yeah.
Yeah, right. And so how did that methodology change? You no longer gluing things? Is it
Oh,
you've
easy.
come
We
up
just
with a
don't glue
better
them
plan?
together.
Yeah, okay. You
Yeah,
just lift it out and there's
yeah,
the
yeah,
eggs.
yeah.
Yeah, awesome.
Mm,
And I know another a big conservation project that happens down there is the one with the Philippine crocs, which is
mhm,
something that you're obviously heavily involved in. Can you tell us about
mhm.
that?
Yeah, so I wouldn't say it's not a recovery program that we're involved in for Philippine frogs. It's
Right.
much more here at Melbourne Conservation Advocacy, and then
Okay.
providing support to the Mabaya Foundation. So the Mabaya Foundation are based in the Philippines, and they've been active since the late 90s. Melbourne Zoo's been and Zoos Victoria have been a huge supporter of the Mabaya Foundation since that period of time. They do a lot of work in situ with the community, or community engagement and education around crocodiles. Do a lot of work around surveying, and protecting the areas where the Philippine crocodiles are found. And more recently as well, they've developed or built the Philippine Crocodile Conservation Centre, the PCCCC, they call it, which is an amazing, amazing place. It's in the centre of Isabela State University in the Philippines. I was lucky enough to go over there year before last and help with the introducing of their adult Philippine crocodiles for the first time, which was just magical going over there and being involved in that.
Yeah, just before, I'd like to hear about that, the
Yeah,
introduction, but can you tell us a bit about the Philippine crocs
of
themselves
course. Yeah,
before,
of course.
just
Of course. I got ahead of myself there. Um,
paint a picture?
Philippine crocodiles are one of the world's most, if not the world's most endangered crocodilian. In terms of wild numbers, wild adults, it's hard to say because some areas of the Philippines are not safe to be able to survey in the southern parts of the Philippines. But it's estimated to be sort of fewer than 150 adults remaining in the wild throughout their range.
Wow.
And they are a species without the efforts of the Mabaya Foundation. The status of that species would likely be very, very different in the wild. Yeah.
Okay. How did they cut? They're in captivity in Australia, in Melbourne Zoo, obviously. How did that
Yes.
come about?
Yeah. Yeah. So we that came about a long, long time before I was at Melbourne.
Yeah.
And the area in the reptile house where the Philippine crocodiles are actually used to be home to a pair of adult saltwater crocodiles. And it was in the early 90s, apparently, where it was sort of decided, hey, this area, it's not really appropriate for a species that grows as large as a saltwater crocodile or an estuarine crocodile. And two really visionary, I guess, mentors of mine, Chris Banks and John Burkett, back in that period of time, were thinking, well, how can we shift out this large species that just doesn't do well in this area, and how can we bring in a species of real conservation significance? And that was sort of how our relationship with Philippine crocodiles here at Melbourne Zoo was founded, through that sort of
Amazing.
mindset of really just shifting away from the normal and focusing on more of a conservation species like that.
Yeah, that's awesome. I feel like the Philippine crocs, I imagine that the average punter, probably 99% of them, would walk in and read Philippine croc and say they've never even heard of it. So,
Oh yeah, totally, yeah, yeah. They're a beautiful species. They are slightly different to, say, estuarine crocodiles in terms of their husbandry, in that you typically can't keep them together year round.
okay.
The males and females can be quite territorial, and often you'll only be introducing them for breeding.
Yeah.
And that's what I was involved in over in the Philippines, going over there to introduce some of the captive crocodiles at the Philippine Crocodile Conservation Centre for the first time.
Yeah.
Slightly nerve
So,
wracking given sort of the importance of those crocodiles, but went like clockwork. Where you open a gate between the enclosure, the female crocodile went into the male's area, they did their thing, and then when she was ready, she left, and you could shut the gate again. So we're able to repeat that
wow.
multiple times, and were successful with the clutch of eggs as well later. And
What what was that time frame like? Female going into female coming out.
oh, an hour and a half or so. Yeah,
Wow. And so
yeah.
you just stood there with a big stick, hoping that you didn't have to use it?
Not even that. Not even that. So it's quite well, like it's in a remote area in the Philippines, and it's been designed in a really good way. So there's a sort of overhead walkway, and there's various gates and interconnecting gates between ponds and things like that. So it was really just a matter of being on the overhead walkway, sort of, opening up a gate and, going from there. We did it all at night. The
Yeah.
crocodiles were
Okay.
obviously a lot more comfortable and confident at night.
Yeah.
A bit harder to sort of observe them, but I think they felt a lot more comfortable. They were more likely to sort of move between pens and things like that.
Yeah, right.
What
How
the
did
Mobile
you
Foundation also does, which is really, really important, is head starting of Philippine crocodiles.
right.
So through areas of their range in the sort of in that Isabella region, monitoring of wild nests and collection of freshly hatched hatchlings, taking them, because obviously that's the point in time when they're most vulnerable to mortality from various predators and things like that. Taking them into the Philippine Crocodile Conservation Centre, raising them for a couple of years to a size where they are sort of safer for release, and then releasing them into the wild. So that was also one thing I was able to experience over there, releasing head started Philippine crocs to the wild. Wow, it
Yeah.
doesn't really get much better
So
than that.
cool. Very
Yeah.
cool. They're not huge crocodiles, are they? Are they sort of
No.
similar to our freshies?
Yeah, maybe a little bit bigger. They look like a small salty, really.
Yeah.
You're looking at probably sort of 3.3 meters for a really, really large male.
Okay.
Yeah, our
Yeah.
male here at Melbourne, probably 2.5 meters. Our female that recently arrived from Cologne Zoo in Germany, she's probably maybe 1.6, 1.7 meters, so still quite small.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
That's very cool. I did want to ask too, how
Hmm.
did you go about determining when was the right time to make the introduction?
In the Philippines or yeah,
Yeah.
Melbourne, where we previously bred them.
Or at Melbourne, either way.
Well, in the Philippines, basically being this is the time of year when they typically are sort of observed mating and things like that. And it was a bit of
Okay.
a tap on the shoulder by some of the directors of the Mobile Foundation where they requested some assistance from us at Melbourne Zoo to help with that.
Yeah, right.
All came together in a couple of weeks, really. It's time to pair them. Can you help? Yeah.
Yeah, sweet. Yeah, that's awesome. And then, so you got a clutch of eggs in the Philippines?
They were successful with having a clutch of eggs laid, and I think they've had another clutch laid the following year. They were infertile though, but I mean that's not unusual. Where sometimes it might take a
Yeah.
year or 2 or 3 of infertile eggs before you get your fertile clutch. But it's a huge
Yeah,
step in the
sure.
right direction.
Oh, absolutely. That's got, yeah, that's part of the formula figured out there.
Yeah.
Uh, Bred them at Melbourne Zoo in the past?
They have. They've been bred twice here at Melbourne Zoo.
Wow.
With the young, were transferred to the Philippines and then also to some various zoos throughout the US as well. So there's
That's
a
amazing.
small smattering of Philippine crocodiles throughout some European and some American zoos as well, all
Very
managed through
cool.
a blood to stud book. Yeah.
Yeah. And another thing that you've been successful with in Melbourne is the Gila monsters. It's a pretty
Hmm.
recent one.
Yep.
Very cool. Can you let us know how that went down?
Yeah.
Actually, hang on.
Okay.
What is a Gila monster?
What is a Gila monster? Well, what is a Gila monster, Joe?
It's a venomous lizard hailing
It
from
is. Yeah. Yeah.
North to
Yeah. So
Central
Gila,
America.
they're from the family Heloderma, one of the, I guess we could say, medically significant venomous lizards. Obviously, there's a bit of conjecture around what lizards are venomous.
Of course.
But yeah, they're a medically significantly venomous lizard from southern parts of the US and into Mexico as well. They're an amazing species, absolutely amazing species, beautiful color, and yeah, really, really interesting biology and ecology. And probably what I think is just I find most remarkable about Gila monsters is there's surprisingly quite little known about them in the wild. I think
Mhm.
there's only been 1 or 2 instances of wild nests actually being found. There's very little
Okay.
known in the reproductive biology of wild Gila monsters.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
very interesting given that, you follow a couple of
Mm,
herpers from the US and they seem to be stumbling over them all the time.
mm, mm.
To know that little is sort of known
Yeah.
about their reproduction, that's fascinating. So
Yeah.
in going into it with that information, what did you have to do to get them to breed?
Well, it was I mean, like any animal, really, it's a lot of trial and error and using your Gila monster sixth sense. Probably the biggest challenge initially with Gila monsters is trying to work out what sex they are.
Yeah, right.
They look very, very similar. One of the sort of more routine ways, I guess, that zoos or keepers of Gila monsters use to sex them is via ultrasound, where you're ultrasounding them looking for them for follicles. But
Okay.
unfortunately, the testes in healers look quite similar to follicles as well, so that's not always the best way to determine the sex of them. Head shape,
Right.
male healers might have a bit of a broad head. Um, Again, not the
That's
most
not
reliable.
good either.
And we actually, for a long time, we had an animal that we thought was male here until it laid 2 eggs.
Probably not a male then.
Probably not a male, so I think that's the best
Yeah.
way to, at this point in time, to sex them. We are actually working with a company at the moment to try and develop a DNA sexing test for Gila monsters, with the aim being to likely try and actually determine the sex of eggs before they're hatched. So then we can actually work out what sex eggs we want to hatch.
Wow,
Pretty cool.
and
Yeah.
very, very cool.
Yeah.
How does that work? So would you take like I don't know, a swab of an egg? Is that enough of a DNA sample to
Literally taking a blood sample from a vein in an egg. So it's been done a few times with Komodo dragons now. Australia Zoo,
Right.
when they bred Komodo dragons a couple of years ago, did that for the first time in Australia. It was
Yeah,
previously sort of developed by Los Angeles Zoo, with Komodo dragons over there. But basically, you're candling an egg with a torch, trying to
yeah.
triangulate where the veins are, and it doesn't always sort of match up because the egg's round. And then using a small insulin syringe to just remove the tiniest drop of blood from a vein,
Tiniest drop of
and then
blood.
using that drop of
Wow.
blood to determine the sex. And then trying to do that obviously for that midway point of incubation, so you can euthanize that egg if it's not the sex that's required.
Yeah, that kind of brings up a good point. I think something that is interesting that might not be known by the average punter is that there are species management plans and that sort of thing for these, well,
Yeah,
for a lot of species that are kept in zoos, because you can't just go and, if you have a Komodo dragon lay 20 eggs or whatever it is, you can't just go and hatch 20 Komodo dragons in Australia,
yeah,
because what are you going to do with them? So,
yeah,
can you tell us how those sort of species management
yeah.
programs operate?
Yeah, sure. So a lot of those programs are administered through the Zoo and Aquarium Association, with ZAR, that you might have heard of. So a lot of the larger zoos and many zoos throughout Australia are members of ZAR. And there's a number of managed species within the region, and species that might be managed for a conservation purpose. They might be managed for a conservation advocacy purpose of having the ability to connect visitors to a conservation program for giraffe or something like that, for example. Um, or they might be purely managed for a zoo population, to have these animals in our zoos and keep these populations sort of stable to a degree. Um, so yeah, I guess there's various reasons why we manage a species. Um, and typically there'd be a couple of people involved in that, a species coordinator, maybe a stud bookkeeper as well, who's monitoring the genetics and the demographics of the population. So basically looking at is the with the aim of trying to ensure the population is genetically healthy, and also make sure that there's reproductive animals and animals of an appropriate age period. You don't want all the animals that are all 20 plus years old
20 years old,
in
yeah.
the aging population. So you want to make sure the demographics are equally as important as the genetics typically.
Yeah.
Um, there's annual reports and recommendations made. So that species coordinator will make recommendations for the betterment of the region. Those recommendations are often breeding recommendations of what animals should be bred, and also transfer recommendations.
Yeah, okay. So it's just all for the betterment of continuing to be able to keep that species, at a
Yeah,
healthy level and well represented
yeah,
in facilities, I guess.
yeah, correct. Yeah. And there's a lot of science behind it too. There's a lot of population management software and modeling software like PMX that's utilized to be able to help determine the pairings and what number of pairings are required to maintain those population targets and that sort of thing.
Yeah,
Um,
gotcha.
so yeah, there's increasingly becoming a lot more science behind the way we manage our animals in zoos too, which I think is really, really important.
Absolutely important. I wish that some of these sorts of ideas and ethics would
Mm.
transfer over to a lot of private keeping.
Yeah, yeah,
But that's
I agree.
probably an entire different topic. We'd probably do an
Yeah.
entire podcast on the ethics of breeding things
Oh,
privately. But
100%, 100%. Well, I might
I
go
do
off topic of herb for a sec though, just while we're talking
yeah.
about some of the advancements in science and things like that in zoos. One thing we've done very recently in Melbourne with our orangutans is um, actually been utilizing drones to deliver food to them really up high on aerial towers. So, of course, orangutans, they spend most of their time in the trees. They're not spending time on the ground, but in a captive setting in a zoo. Um, Typically they're spending a sort of an uneven time budget on the ground compared to in arboreal spaces. So what we started doing is actually utilizing a drone, a really cool fishing drone. It's got a little sort of click release button on it that we could take parcels of food, put them right up high, 30, 40 meters up a tower, and that's increasing the arboreal time spent of orangutans. We've got all sorts of monitoring and things like that happening to make sure what we're doing is backed by science and is guided by the right sort of principles. So yeah, there's all sorts of advancements like that being made with all taxa really, but I think that orangutan
Yeah.
with drones is really, really cool.
That's an awesome example
Yeah.
because, naturally, if an animal doesn't have to go far to receive its prey or its food or its reward or whatever, then it's not
Yeah.
going to, and it's going to get lazy. But if an orangutan
Exactly.
has to
Exactly.
climb 30 or
Yeah.
40 meters high,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
using muscles, it's working
Yeah.
out, it's doing all those things. That's
It's doing what it should be doing, which is being up high, not
oh
sitting on
yeah,
the ground. Yeah.
and that's the best part about you
Yeah.
know
Yeah.
being
And I
able
mean
to see an animal
yeah.
do what it naturally does.
The same principles can be applied to so many herp as well, I think. Like we keep so many species in a way that really is just totally unnatural to the way they behave in the wild. Even if you
Absolutely,
think of arboreal species, snakes, often they're going right up and down a tree throughout the day and the night for
every
hunting.
day.
And
Yeah,
yet we might be keeping them in a 2 foot high box and thinking that's acceptable. And
yeah.
obviously
It,
we've got to be realistic and we're always striving to do better and things like that. But it just makes you think a little bit, I think, sometimes.
Yeah, should make you think.
Yeah,
I think
it should.
is important there. It should make you
Yeah,
think.
yeah, yeah.
Um, but thinking about things, you had to think a lot about the Gila monsters. I want to go back to it
We're going back to that.
because,
Yep, yep.
yes, there was trial and error involved.
Yeah, a lot of trial and error. A lot of trial and
Yeah.
error.
So what issues were you facing there?
Oh, all sorts of issues. First off, well, how do we encourage the male to mate with the female? Being number one challenge, and at
Did
a
you just have
seasonal
a pair?
oh, maybe 1.2 or two. Yeah, 1.2, I think back then it was.
Okay. Yep.
And it was, well, how do we actually encourage this male to mate with a female when we're doing everything we're trying to, and we're not getting that mating? And I should have said before that, of course, we're cycling them. We're housing them outside over winter to replicate that really
Oh,
cold brumation that they're
that's so
getting. So
cool.
we're letting them get down to 10 degrees for a period of sort of 2 to 3 months. So
Nice.
really replicating that natural brumation cycle. But even with doing that, we were still having trouble getting the males to actually show interest in the females. So we thought, well, let's
Yep.
try and bring in another male from another zoo who we got in on breeding loan. And we were able to combat the two males. Just that
Yep.
male combat. All of a sudden, we've got the males now mating the females.
Yep.
And we'd have clutches of eggs laid. But the main problem we had for quite a few seasons was the females just didn't seem comfortable in laying the eggs. So when you expect a lizard to lay their eggs, typically you'd expect them to lay them all at once and not sort of pop one out one day and a few days later another, and then a
Scattered.
few days later another
Yep.
one, and it's scattered around. So one of our keepers here, Jaden, approached it in a really cool way. And he approached it of, well, okay, we don't know too much about the reproductive biology of healers in the wild, but we suspect they spend a lot of their time in burrows. So rather than offering them all these different substrates and things like that to dig through and lay in, why don't we actually just replicate a burrow? And he approached that by replicating sort of a kangaroo rat burrow in a recycled plastic box.
Yeah.
So creating a box with multiple sort of concertinated sort of tracks through it. I mean, the box might only be that big that it's laying in the box
Yeah.
in the, I mean,
Yep.
but
Yep.
down a travel equivalent of sort of 2 meters down the end of this box to that lane.
Yeah. So like
And
essentially like an artificial warren, I guess.
exactly, yeah, an artificial warren is a good way to put it. And we saw that almost straight away. We're having all the eggs laid at once.
Yeah.
We saw the animals nest guarding. Yep. Saw them
Big ticks.
backfilling, but not backfilling over the eggs, which I guess
Oh,
indicates that they're actually not burying the eggs.
yeah.
Because the healer eggs themselves are incredibly challenging to incubate. They're very, very sensitive eggs compared to most
Right.
other lizards. So there's a lot of exposure to the air and things like that. So yeah, that was a big breakthrough with them. They're still a
That's
tricky species. Still a
yeah.
very tricky species. Their eggs are very, very sensitive.
Yeah.
We're doing all
But
sorts of
that
things, sterilizing vermiculite and using antifungal powders
oh
on them if needed. And yeah,
Jesus. I just
yeah,
want to say that that is such a cool breakthrough and an idea that came from just thinking about the natural history
yeah,
of the animal,
yeah,
even without having we didn't know exactly what they did, but you
mhm,
still managed to apply a bit of natural history knowledge to be able
sure,
to get a positive result, even if it's not exactly what they might be doing in the wild. It's still
yeah,
translated across to
yeah,
being able
yeah,
to get in
yeah.
fertile eggs where you wanted them.
Exactly. And it's looking at sort of the behavior of them and how can we replicate that in an artificial setting.
Yeah, but
And I mean, that was an ultimate breakthrough. We went from sort of maybe hatching one out every year or two, um, to 8 or 9 last year.
incredible.
And yeah, I mean, we've got another few eggs in the incubator at the moment, and we've really been able to now sort of establish a healthy, demographically healthy population of Gila monsters in the region, which is great.
I wonder if I could get one just for back of house at Cairns Aquarium. That'd be nice.
Could be a bit of a challenge.
It might be a challenge.
Might be a challenge, but I
Um,
know something to stay to.
yeah. Um, so you were facing issues with fungus and things by the sounds of it?
Yeah, they're very, very sensitive eggs, very sensitive to moisture and fungus. So we're even using like tinea powders or sprays on the eggs at times
Yeah,
to kind of control the fungus. I think we've got the brumation down pat. We've got the
yeah,
oviposition sort of down pat now. It's just the incubation's the next kind of one to continually fine tune and improve.
yeah, right. So you
And they've got a
hatched
very
out
long incubation too. It's like 5 or 6 months. So a lot can go wrong in that period of time.
That's a long time. That is a long
Yeah,
time. So,
yeah.
I think you hatched 8 out from 1 clutch last year?
It was 8 from 2 clutches, I believe.
2
Yeah.
clutches, okay. And what incubation method did you have success with?
We've tried a few different things, but we've had most success having them on sterilized vermiculite in a, those steamer click clack sort of tubs that
Yep,
everyone uses for incubating eggs in one of
yep,
those. Thin layer of vermiculite on the bottom. Um, I couldn't tell you sort of the vermiculite to water ratio or anything like that, but it's a fairly dry mix.
okay.
A small piece of egg crate to suspend the egg off the ground.
Just off
And
it,
then
yep.
Jaden, one of the keepers here, is actually he's a master with 3D printers, and he's 3D printed these little holder
Little
things
egg
that are attached
cups.
to the egg crate for the eggs that they sit in perfectly.
Nice.
And yeah, we've had a fair bit of success with that now.
And what sort of temperatures were they incubated at?
26 degrees.
Holy
26
shit.
degrees. So quite
You'd need a
cool.
fridge. You'd need a
Yeah,
fridge up here.
that's what we're using. Is we're actually using refrigerated incubators, so incubators that heat and cool to maintain that nice temperature.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
awesome. What's the feeding regime like for an adult healer?
They don't eat a lot, but it's
Yeah,
very seasonal.
yeah,
And I feel like probably the best way to describe their reproduction is almost like every part of the year doing a different thing with their husbandry to facilitate that, and it is basically replicating what's going on in the wild.
yeah,
So after laying, feeding them quite a lot, getting them ready for brumation again, then they're not eating for 3 or 4 months, and then slowly bringing them out of brumation, starting the feeding again. But they are
yeah.
prone to obesity in captivity. We're feeding them sort of small mice, quail eggs, things like that. But
Yeah,
yeah,
okay.
they're a species really prone to obesity, like all reptiles are.
Yeah, I guess sort of
Yeah.
similar to just feeding an orangutan on the ground. If you just keep giving it
Mm.
the food and don't making it
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
English, not
yeah,
making it exercise much or do too
yeah.
much, it's gonna get
But I
fat
mean, I think
pretty
it's fair to
quick.
say probably 90% of captive reptiles would be grossly overweight compared to a wild reptile.
That's conservative.
Yeah, maybe 95, 99.
Maybe 95, yeah.
Yeah.
I'd probably tend to agree with that. I
Mm,
mean, you have an animal die, if you open it
mm,
up, you'll see fatty reserves in pretty
yeah,
much all of them.
yeah, yeah.
Um, anything else reptile related at Melbourne that excites you? Well, I mean,
Oh,
probably all of it, but anything else in
everything,
particular?
everything. I mean, what I think is really cool that we've got here is we've got a really good culture around just continually trying to do what we do better. And that's been instilled in keepers here for sort of generations, I guess, of keepers of always trying to keep things progressing, never letting anything stay stagnant.
Yeah,
And like I was saying earlier on, Joe, the technology that we've got available these days compared to 15 years ago, particularly around heating and lighting, just being able to provide or better replicate sunlight to our animals now, we're seeing the behavioural benefits of that and the increased activity and things like that in indoor exhibits.
yeah.
Based on some of those new advancements of technology.
Have you got some examples of sort of more recent equipment that you're utilizing down there?
Um, yeah, I guess, like, if we're looking at it from how do we replicate sunlight essentially in a box, there's not one light that does that for you. Like, sunlight
Yeah. Oh, of
consists of
course,
sort of
yeah.
different things, visible light, UV, infrared wavelengths, and things like that. So we've got over many of our exhibits now, you look up and there's lights everywhere. But each light has a purpose, whether it's LED light for visible light, whether it's uh, par 38 lights for infrared A, whether it's T5 tubes or another way of providing UV for UVB. So trying to sort of best piece everything together. And some of the gadgets we've got now, like power density meters and thermal cameras and all sorts of things like that. Like, I remember back when a tent gun was the most exciting toy. Like, we've got all sorts of things now that I don't
Oh,
even know how to
yeah,
use.
yeah, yeah. What a power density meter? What? What is
So
that?
it's measuring the amount of basically the density of, sorry, the I need someone else to explain it to you. I'm still trying to get my head around it, but measuring how much power, like how much power is coming out of a light. So if we're trying to
Okay,
replicate light, we want the energy produced by that at the distance from the animal to be sort of similar to what it would be from the sun. So
gotcha, gotcha.
essentially, all these
It
things we do are trying to best replicate sunlight.
that's a very cool bit of kit. That's
Mm.
interesting because it's all well and good to just put a light over something and check the heat, but there's
Yeah,
no good if you
there's so
don't
much more
know
to it. Yeah,
so much more to it. I guess it sort of translates to heat transfer to the animals, like
yeah,
a
yeah,
smaller animal obviously is
yeah,
gonna warm
yeah.
up faster or a big,
And
thick,
and the wavelength of heat that you're providing too. So, like, for example, infrared A is what the sunlight produces the most of in terms of heat. And that penetrates deeper into the sort of dermal layers of a reptile or any animal than infrared C does. So, like the ceramic heat emitters that used to be the bee's knees of how to keep your pet carpet python,
Yeah,
um, they're really quite useless in actually providing or effectively heating an animal because the type of
an
heat they're
animal.
providing is infrared C, which
Yeah,
doesn't really penetrate into the tissue very well. It has a
yeah.
drying effect, and of course, for species like chelonians, that can be devastating.
Oh, yeah, right.
Yeah,
Yeah, absolutely.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah, interesting. And when you're running several different types of lights for different applications, are you running them in separate parts of an enclosure or sort of all
Uh,
together in
I
one?
mean, it all depends on the enclosure.
Okay.
And the species and the layout of the enclosure and what you're trying to do and what you're trying to provide.
Yeah,
I
I
guess
guess and then
the theory being you want to be providing a patch essentially of sunlight in that enclosure.
yeah.
So there's no point having a UV over this end and infrared over there and an LED over there. Like you're trying to bring it all together to replicate a patch of sunlight.
Yeah. Yeah.
The challenge being often that you've got different heights and different levels to do that because of the different intensity of UV coming from a 2.5 tube or the power density of the heat produced from a infrared heat lamp.
Yeah, of
So
course,
yeah,
and then compound that with different
yeah,
shaped exhibits and enclosures
yeah,
and
yeah,
animals' natural
yeah,
histories,
yeah,
and then their
yeah,
ability to absorb all these different
yeah,
um, types of light and whatnot. It
yeah.
becomes quite
That'll
complicated.
be that'll be the next big breakthrough. I think is imagine a product that can do all of that at once. Just plug and play, and yeah, wouldn't that be good?
Plug and play. It'd have to have a dial. You'd have to be able to tone it up
Yeah,
and down,
yeah,
I
yeah.
think.
I
Otherwise
mean,
it'd get
we're so far off that. Like, there's the newer technology of the LED UV, which I think's scary and questionable at this point in time. But
it's a bit
maybe
new, isn't it?
technology sort of improves and becomes a bit safer and more tested. That could be a
Yeah,
really effusive or innovative way to provide UV.
definitely, and I think it's, what am I saying? It's new, it's new, so
Yeah,
more
yeah,
testing like, it has to be, um has to start somewhere. That's what I'm
yeah,
trying to say.
exactly. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um, I did wanna talk too about, I know obviously we've spoken pretty much predominantly about, exotic things.
Mhm.
How what would it look like for you to do an import now? What
Mhm.
would determine what species you would be
Yeah,
importing? Why are you importing it? Where's it
yeah,
coming from, and what do
yeah.
you have to do to get it here?
Oof, that's an open-ended question.
It's a big
That's a
one.
good
It's a
one.
meaty one.
That is a good one. I guess at first off, well, what's the point of having that species? And um, God, there's heaps of things I'd love to have here at Melbourne. I'd love to have mangrove vipers and Bitis parviocula and
Oh, yeah.
bushmasters and gharial and all sorts of things like that.
You've got good
But I
taste,
guess
my
for me, the
friend.
first question is, can we actually do it well? Um,
Okay.
like I don't want to be coming into work and seeing a gharial squished in half in the corner of a exhibit. Obviously, that's an extreme. We're not going to be doing that at all. But I think for me, the guiding principle's got to be: can we actually do it well? Um,
Yeah.
that's got to be the main thing. And obviously any internal institutional policies, guidelines, things like that. But basically, what's the purpose of having this animal? How is it going to contribute to whatever the mission is of the organisation? Um, then I guess the next thing is, well, can we actually do it? And that's where Australia is a minefield with the various layers of legislation and policy and things like
Oh,
that.
yeah.
Um, there's of course there's state legislation. There is federal legislation. There's various layers of federal legislation. There's CITES regulations, all sorts of things like that. Um, so I guess it's got to be making sure that legally we can do it. Um, so as a bit of an example, for us to be able to import a species into the country, it's got to be approved for live import, so listed on the live import list. There's got to be an approved import health standard developed for that. So for reptiles, for example, there's an overarching import health standard for all reptiles, excluding crocodilians. There's a separate one for crocodilians and crocodilian eggs as well. There might be an import health standard for zoo elephants from Malaysia or something like that. Various import health standards. Um, and then it depends on the CITES listing of the animal too. So typically for a CITES listed animal, a CITES 1 listed animal, Philippine crocodiles, for example, um, if you're trying to bring a CITES 1 listed animal into the country, it's got to be for a conservation benefit. And to
Right.
demonstrate that, there's what's called a CCP, a Cooperative Conservation Program in place, which is basically endorsed by the federal government, Department of Environment, to tangibly demonstrate that that import has a conservation purpose. So there's all those sort of layers. Then the next layer is the import health conditions, which we touched on a little bit. But for reptiles, many species, the way Australia approaches biosecurity is basically trying to deal for imports, particularly of zoo animals, is trying to do as much as we can before the animal gets here to make sure
Right.
the animal's clean, for one
Yeah.
better word. Or
Yeah.
for reptiles, that typically involves a 90-day pre-export quarantine, where the animal's got to be kept completely separate from other reptiles. Obviously, there's multiple permits and checks and inspections and things like that before the animal gets here. And then there's, again, a post-arrival quarantine period once the animal's in the country. So that's
Well,
summing it up in a sort of couple of seconds, but really like importing an exotic animal into the country. Normally, you're looking at about a 12 to 18 month kind of turnaround from the pressing play to that animal actually
getting the
being out
animal.
quarantine on the ground.
I imagine it sounds like it's 12 to 18 months of going back and forth with different government
Yeah,
bodies and
yeah,
different departments and
yeah,
a lot of
yeah.
different levels of
Mm,
bureaucracy.
there is, but I think it's also
And
for a good reason.
yes,
Yeah, in the like we are very lucky here in Australia. We don't have bird flu here in Australia right now. We don't have so many of these different diseases.
yeah,
So yeah, I think it is. Yeah, I think it is for a good reason. There's some bits of the legislation that are frustrating when certain layers of legislation don't talk to each other, like maybe a state legislation that doesn't talk to like an animal allowed by a state authority that then you're not able to import on the live import list or vice
yeah,
versa or things like that.
yeah.
Um, but yeah, a lot of different layers of policy and bureaucracy.
A lot of different layers. Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Mm.
It sounds like, yeah, I think I would be banging my head against a wall pretty much the whole entire period if it were me. Yeah.
Yeah.
Obviously, we've got all these rules in there for a
Mhm.
reason. It sounds like
Mm.
probably an appropriate level of bureaucracy and different regulations
Mm.
and things, but I think my patience for it would be um,
Yeah, yeah,
lot or
definitely.
maybe.
It can really help you develop patience, which I'm not very good at. I'm not a patient person at all. So
No, but you
yeah,
have no choice but to be.
yeah, yeah.
Um, I guess something interesting that I wanted to
Mm.
sort of raise was we had different challenges in the reptile keeping field 20 years
Yeah,
ago to different ones that we sort of have
yeah,
now.
yeah,
I know that you mentioned OH&S earlier.
yeah,
There's
yeah.
more OH&S now,
Mm.
which is probably good and
Yeah,
bad. But are
yeah.
there any things that you could compare and contrast from when you started to
Oh,
where we're at now?
look, I think there's different ways to look at it, and I mean, there's extremes of looking at it too. But yeah, I mean, the definitely the dramatic change has been the improvements in the care that you're able to deliver to the animals we're looking after, and that's going to be the most important thing. I mean, it's a different industry compared to what it was sort of back then, and what I'm sure it was 20 years before that as well.
Yeah,
Um, but I think probably one of the things that I'm really conscious of is we've got to continually sort of have the next generation of people coming through. Um, and it is hard to find good zoo reptile keepers in that
what
there's going to
what do
be
you think
elements of fit and all sorts of different things like that.
what are the barriers there?
Oh, that's a great question.
Well, I guess
Um,
if we knew it, it wouldn't be so hard anymore,
yeah,
maybe.
yeah, I think that's it. I mean, I think like zookeeping it's a great career, but it's also probably unfortunately from the pay rates at some zoos, maybe not the career with the most longevity for some people.
Yeah.
So I think sometimes unfortunately we're as an industry are kind of filtering out people before they actually get a chance to flourish.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
if that
I
makes
would
sense.
tend to
Yeah.
yeah, I'd tend to agree with that.
Mm.
obviously, of course, it's probably just standard across the board, cost of living, inflation, et cetera, et
Exactly.
cetera.
Exactly. Yeah.
Wages aren't increasing. Zookeeping is
Yeah.
notoriously
Yeah.
a low wage
Yeah.
job as it is.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I also think something that I've found, at least in my relatively short zookeeping career, is that um, you really have to be very multifaceted and
100%. Yeah.
pretty much extremely skilled and very knowledgeable in such a broad range of different areas. Like I'd hardly swung a hammer. I talk about this all the time.
Yeah.
I'd hardly swung a hammer or used a drill before I started zookeeping, and
Yeah.
now I'm building enclosures and whatnot. But thankfully, I did study ecology at university, so I've got some understanding of the natural history of animals to be able to then apply that to not only the way you keep them, but the way that you build the enclosures, and you really do have to have a well-rounded understanding of what it takes to keep animals. It's very all encompassing animal keeping if you're doing it correctly. Not to say that I'm the be all and end all of it, but we're always trying to do better, and you have to really. I'm ranting now, Alex, but you got to
No,
put you
that's
got to
fine. That's
got to
not
put,
ranting you,
got
so
to put yourself
you should
into
all
it.
step up.
Yeah, that's just my experience anyway. I think
Yeah.
you really have to be across a lot of different things to be in the zoo game, and I can totally see how people would feel maybe underappreciated just because maybe the financial side doesn't necessarily translate across to
Yeah.
what you're
Yeah.
doing every day.
I totally agree, and I think probably one of the unfortunate things sometimes about herp keeping is that it might attract people for the wrong reason. I mean, I feel like it's an industry rife with egos and issues and things like that, that are people essentially doing it for the wrong reason. I think we need to be having a good hard look at ourselves sometimes of why we're in this career, and making sure we're doing it for the benefit of animals, benefit of conservation, and not just to stroke egos as well.
Yes, I concur,
And I
and
think probably US politics as well at the moment, but hey.
let's not get into that. But it seems to be something that Melbourne does really well, just totally focused on animal care and trying to do the best for them, and certainly not worrying about views or likes or anything like that. So I must commend you on the ship you're running down there, mate. You're doing a good job.
Thank you. Thank you.
I probably got just. Actually, no, you already answered that question. What are some positives of being a reptile keeper?
Oh, I think it's the best job ever, to be honest. I think it's incredible. I think every day is different. And I think, look, I'm biased, but I think honestly, the ability to, you're not just looking after the animal, you're looking after the environment. You're curating a habitat. You're working with microhabitats and technology and all these cool different things. I mean, I think it's like you're a kid in a candy shop. You've got these amazing array of things around you, and you're creating this microclimate, it's wonderful habitats. You're breeding the food for some of the animals. You really, I think it's a much more intense style of keeping than maybe some other taxa. Of course, maybe you're not training your animals or doing sort of cooperative care to the same level that you might be doing with something like a primate. Of course, every taxa's got different requirements and things like that, but I think for a lot of people, myself included, that environmental control is what really I find quite interesting in herp keeping.
Yeah, I tend
to be a great example of that.
I tend to agree with that. I didn't mean to make it sound so negative before when I was saying you have to be so multifaceted and well-rounded, because I think, just speaking from my own experience, I think in terms of like my own personal development, I've grown massively as a person just because I have had to learn all of these things. And then, even stepping into a managerial role, which I have recently, and you've obviously have done as well, you then have to learn the personal skills as well. So it's certainly a job that you can, the room there to grow is massive personally, at least, and in your own life.
Personally and professionally, and from the betterment and the care of the animals too.
Yeah, so philosophical.
It is.
Yeah. Well, Alex, I'm pretty happy to round things out there. What do you think? Is there anything you wanted to?
I think it's covered a lot, Joe. That was really good. It was great having a chat to you.
Yeah, I agree. You're not really much of a social media guy, but if anyone was, okay, well, I won't mention that then.
Oh, you can if you want. I don't have to look up and see what it is.
No, it's all good. We'll just leave it.
I'm not
Hey,
on the interwebs as much as I used to be on the
no,
Instagram.
you're busy learning about policies to bring cool snakes in, by the sounds of it. Hey, thanks so much for your time, Alex. I
Oh,
really
that's all
appreciate it.
good.
As
Yeah.
always, everyone, thanks so much for listening. Feel free to reach out on Instagram at joemac.uthl, like, follow, subscribe, and all that good stuff. So thanks very much.